This is Garis, Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 677, entitled, "For Christ's sake, Manosphere, shift your political arse." Description. This flyer lashes out at the awful apolitical wimpiness of the MGTOWs. It pushes for the transition of the manosphere away from consciousness raising, which is the first phase of male gender politics, into the political phase of menfairing the gender laws, so that millions of men can be liberated from the awful gender oppressions that women commit against men. For example, the much more serious man's slavery by women, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc. Masculists have a contempt for the apolitical, gutless wimpery of MGTOWs who lack fight. Now the flyer itself. For Christ's sake, Manosphere, shift your political arse. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I'm growing increasingly impatient and angry at the MGTOWs and their passive, inefficient approach to gender politics. I've always considered the MGTOWs to be, in quotes, apolitical wimps who don't fight for the liberation of men, who show no solidarity for the plight of other men in an increasingly gynocentric society. So this flyer is devoted to a masculine expression of contempt and rage at the fucking MGTOWs and their apolitical gutlessness. I listen regularly to Sandman, who's one of the more intelligent members of the Manosphere. I also listen regularly to Aaron Clarey, who's another of the intellectual elite in the Manosphere. Neither of them are fighters, unlike the Masculists, who will bite the fucking head off a monoconscious feminist using his full male, testosterone-laden anger and hatred at what monoconscious feminism has done to society. This flyer explains why the Manosphere needs to move on into its second major historical phase of male gender political development, taking a page from the feminist book in its historical development. I'll then suggest how very angry masculists can crush monoconscious feminism by destroying monoconscious feminists' credibility. I start with feminism's major historical development, which took place in two major phases. The initial consciousness-raising phase, which took place in the late 60s and early 70s, followed by the political phase, in which politically minded feminists got the gender laws changed so that they were a lot more favourable to women, in brackets, but a lot less to men, see later. Because I'm old, in brackets, I'll be 80 in 3 years. I was already a young adult when the second wave of feminism broke out in the late 60s. In contrast, most MGTOWs today are a third of my age, in their 20s and 30s, so don't have anywhere near my level of historical sense when it comes to gender politics. In the first feminist phase, consciousness raising, young women, mostly university students, would sit around in discussion groups called consciousness raising groups, trying to increase their awareness of how men oppressed them. Of course, they never talked about how women oppressed men. That would have been women taking responsibility for their own lives, which of course women, having rather childlike minds, never really wanted to face up to. So it'll be we masculists who will force women to, or they will pay a very heavy price of not getting a man. In the 70s, the leaders of the feminist movement in the US, in brackets, mostly Jewish intellectuals, e.g. Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, etc., moved on to change the gender laws so that they were more favourable to women, and thus changed the lives of millions of women, which, speaking as a masculist, I am strongly convinced that men need to do the same, which is the whole driving point of this flyer. In 1966, Betty Friedan, the mother of the second wave of feminism, in brackets, due to the publication of her book, The Feminine Mystique, in 1963, that spoke about the ennui of American upper-middle-class housewife women and the need for female careerism, close brackets, established the feminist organization NOW, N-O-W, National Organization for Women, that helped change women profoundly with such things as equal pay for equal work, equal access to the professions, the abortion right, take over the divorce courts, setting up equal rights committees in legislative bodies, etc. NOW, and similar organizations, profoundly changed women's lives because it created laws that applied to millions of women, not just to a handful of women sitting in a consciousness-raising circle. Of course, before such gender laws could be changed, there had to be the need to cause such changes, and that need, that push, came as a result of large numbers of women having had their feminist consciousnesses raised by sitting in consciousness-raising groups, reading feminist books, etc. The manosphere, that is, men on the internet, talking about men's lib, needs to go through the same historical transition, away from the initial consciousness-raising phase, talking about how women oppress men, in brackets, as is currently occurring in the 2020s, into the next major historical phase of changing the gender laws so that millions of men get liberated from the awful oppressions that millions of women impose on men. This second phase in the liberation of men is not going to occur using the MGTOW approach, since the MGTOWs are apolitical. They are passive and useless. They are gutless and wimpy. To achieve what the Masculists want, that is the menfairing of the gender laws, fundamental changes in society will have to be implemented, and that will involve the destruction of monoconscious feminism via the bi-consciousing of society. That is, the teaching of society that gender oppression is very much a two-way street. That is, that women oppress men too, and that men will not be liberated from the major oppressions that women impose on men, in brackets, for example, the big three of women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, close bracket, until these big three are removed. And to do that will require fundamental changes in society. Masculist theorists, like myself, are very conscious that most of men's gender issues will be largely solved by the fipping of women, the creation of a FIP society. That is one in which both sexes are socialized by parents and educated by teachers and professors to be FIPs, that's financially independent persons, who are FIPs as adults and hence do not manslave and divorce rape men due to women not being FIPs. Masculists are abolitionists who see fluffies, in brackets, equals traditional women who expect to live off the labour and money of a man for decades of his life, thus manslaving him, and for one father in four, divorce raping him, close brackets, as vermin. To have your masculinist consciousness raised means, in effect, that you see fluffydom as manslavery, manslavery as slavery, and hence to be hated and a war issue. Masculists are at war against their two main enemies, namely the fluffies and the fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges, who butcher so badly one father in four that now 2/3 of young men in many Western countries refuse to marry and reject paternity. Masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and FIP up, or they are severely punished by not getting a man. There's real anger and hatred growing amongst young men now in many Western countries. As proof of this, consider the recent poll taken by the reputable polling company Pew, P-W, Research Center, who found that 63% of young men in the US, brackets, aged between 18 and 30, refuse to even date young women, claiming that these young women were undateable due to them being poisoned by, in brackets, monoconscious feminist attitudes towards men. To menfair the gender laws, women will need to be forced by men, by masculisted men, to fip up, or be so severely punished by masculisted men, in brackets, who in time will be most men, as masculist ideas become as widely accepted as feminist ideas and accepted by both sexes, close brackets, that these women are effectively exterminated, since fluffy women will be forced to rot on the shelf, despised, hated, seen as manslaving, divorce-raping vermin due to them not having made the effort to fip up by getting career-competent educations at high school and college. So expect, fluffy style, to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus making her the enemy of the masculists, who aim to wipe out such women off the face of the earth by forcing them to die slow, miserable deaths, rotting on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected both socially and sexually. This is the end of part 1.